Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 158 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. We're off to Wales today. We're off to Powys on the show. Indeed, we're actually just above the Royal Welsh Showground near Llandrindod, Wales. Sarah James is with me today. She farms poultry, beef, and sheep on 140 acres with her husband, Aston. Their 14,500 hens produce free-range eggs on a Stonegate contract for Waitrose, and they also have some interesting diversifications, both on and off the farm, including a holiday letting business and a relatively new habitat creation business, which we'll speak about today as well. She also works for Ranelagh Wildlife Trust as a project manager for one of their nature reserves, and is just a very busy person. Sarah, thanks for coming on. You mean you are very busy? Tell us a bit more about yourself and how you sort of spread your time.
Yeah, time management's a good one. Yeah, hi all. Farmer's daughter, been farming all my life. Didn't really want to be a farmer when I went off to university. It didn't look like a very attractive option back then. Mum and Dad worked bloody hard, and no, we never went on holiday and things. But it's drawn me back. Some people say it's a bit of a disease and it's in your blood. So yeah, I'm finding myself back working bloody hard too. Oh dear.
And you have, as we'll sort of see later, you've sort of moved about through your life, but
yeah.
You're currently in Powys. Tell us about your part of Powys.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the country here. Mid Wales is just so lovely. And I've lived in Scotland down the Lake District, so very dramatic landscapes wherever I've lived. So I've been extremely lucky. But Powys itself and Radnorshire, the old county that we live in, is a little bit of a black hole when it comes to sort of business and support. It's a pass through between Snowdonia and Cardiff. So the industry, the tourism industry, is taking off here now for accommodation, but there needs to be a lot more destination and experience sort of businesses to start in this area to really draw the people in. But it is a lovely, lovely place to live.
Yeah, it is, which anyone who's been to the Royal Welsh will know. Royal Welsh, of course, coming up. You're going next month?
Yes, very excited. I used to be head of business development for the show, and I only left them last year.
Okay.
So it'll be nice to see the show back on, and people, especially in the agricultural industry, getting back together and being able to socialise and sort of have that real community spirit again, because the show does that fantastically. So yeah, really excited, looking forward to it.
Yeah, let's look back a bit, because as you said, you are a farmer's daughter. You grew up in farming, but unlike a lot of people who grow up in farming, you weren't in one place.
No. So we were in on about 150 acre farm down in Wales, in another part of mid Wales, and it was back in the 80s. My dad started with absolutely nothing from a farm point of view, and his mum was determined he was going to have a farm. And they bought their first farm off the back of selling rabbits. Okay. That used to be a great commodity way back. So they bought their first farm with rabbits and things. So he started from nothing, and we ended up with 500 acres in Scotland. But back in the 80s, we borrowed the money to buy the farm. The interest rates were astronomical in the early 80s, and he thought he was going to go broke. So we sold the 150 acres in Wales, and we bought the 500 in Scotland for roughly the same money. And we kind of did the same thing when we came back. We were running 1,000 to 1,200 eventually pedigree cleans, closed flock, and roughly 100 sucklers with followers. And Dad sort of moved from high-end pedigree limmies to a lower maintenance Galloways, belted Galloways and Solaires, to have a much more lower input system. So he was sort of a bit ahead of his time, really, with how things are now looking that the industry's going to go. So yeah, I've lived in 3 countries, so to speak, but farming is farming. It's pretty much the same wherever you are, and even more so now globally. I mean, prices and things are affected by so many things we have no control over. So it's an interesting industry to be in at the moment.
Yeah. You went to Manchester Metropolitan University to do an art and design degree, and there you specialised in corporate identity, branding, and advertising, which is slightly different to maybe it's not too different to what you're doing now. Did you consider back then going in a very different direction in life?
Yeah, I always knew I was going to end up working for myself, and I always wanted to be able to do that. And the most expensive part of setting up your own company is the branding and the advertising and all that kind of thing. You spend thousands on that. So I thought, well, if I go and learn how to do that bit, it'll save me a fortune.
It's true, though.
Well, yeah, and I just thought, like, to be honest, 3 years living in Manchester and working in Manchester. So because we're coming from a farming background, there's not much spare cash. I had to get a student loan. I had to have 2 or 3 jobs. So I was a bouncer at the Students' Union. I worked in a printing press. And yeah, just various jobs, getting money so that we could afford to stay there and have the lifestyle that came with being in Manchester and sitting and drinking coffee and things in a nice little street cafe, which you just don't do when you're living in the rural area as much. So it was a total learning experience. And because I had those jobs and I stayed in Manchester during the summers to work for the printers, doing design and artwork and things for them, it's sort of like I was like, well, actually, everybody's got to work hard. I looked at mum and dad and they, worked hard and never had a holiday and things, because you just can't, it's difficult to get off farm, isn't it, for any period of time. So I just thought, well, actually, sitting in an office, working just as hard as you do to be at home on the farm, actually, I'd rather be outside and doing stuff on the farm. So yeah, once I finished uni, I moved back up to Scotland and went to help dad on the farm.
Yeah, and you were there for a couple of years?
Yeah, we decided dad's health wasn't great. And I've got a sister that I'd have to buy out. And we decided it was much easier to move back down to Wales where my sister already was. And we'd sort of sort out inheritance and succession planning and everything then, rather than when it came to it. Because I don't think, well, looking back, I should never have sold it. We should have rented it out. Selling land's a bad idea, especially now when you're looking at what prices are now. But that's hindsight. You can't go back. So yeah, life is totally learning. Everything you do, right or wrong, is learning, and you just can't regret the things that you should have maybe done a bit differently because you didn't know then that shouldn't be what you did. But came down, I found my husband, I've got 2 lovely kids, and we're farming now. So it's all worked out pretty good.
Yeah.
and we're busy. So yeah.
And it did mean sort of in that in between time as well. I mean, you've had a lot of experience in various bits of the sort of add-on parts of the industry.
Yeah. The industry's huge. I mean, I don't think when you're sat at 16 with your careers advisor in school, they have no idea about the scope of what this industry can offer people. I mean, there's such a massive amount of the industry that you don't really consider. It's not all people stood in fields in knee deep in whatever to make food. There's so many add-on industries. I spent most of my career in my life managing sales agents across the country, across the UK, selling livestock identification. And obviously that changed massively in 2009 when EID came in and the technology really hit the marketplace for that. But the industry is huge. I mean, there's mechanics, engineering, tractor manufacturers, sale, there's loads of jobs across every sector. The meat supply chain, every supply chain that gets a product onto your table has a varying, degree of amount of people that are needed. So I think the industry is a huge employer, and I don't think people appreciate that like they should. It's not all about the grassroots farmer on the field sort of thing. There's loads of people connected to this industry. So if we're not doing well, there's a lot of other people that aren't doing well, because if we can't pay and buy and renew tractors and build sheds and keep moving forward, there's a lot of people suffering because of that.
Yeah. Let's talk about your farm now. Give me some more info.
So we are relatively small, 140 acres altogether. That's on 2 different sites. So we have the main holding at home, which we run a beef and sheep unit. We are only small, so we've got about 250 breeding ewes. We buy in sort of 25 hogs every year and put them to the tup. Then we have, we were rearing calves, so we'd buy 40 calves each autumn, take them through to 16 months old, sell them as stores, and we were half heifers and half steers, so that they were going for breeding. The heifers, we were buying really good quality, really most expensive calves you can get on the market out of dairy heifers, by Belgian Blue and Linney Bull. So we were buying really high quality so that we were keeping that quality as we went through the system. We've decided last year that we were going to try and expand the profit margin. Whether this is right or wrong, people will probably go mad at you, say crazy, that we would keep the heifers, that we would cut back down, and we'd buy 25 really good quality heifers in every year. We'd go through and put them down with a calf at foot and then sell them out with a calf at foot. Because anybody that rear calves knows the first 6 months is the most expensive and the most deadly, when you're going to lose things and pneumonia and everything else and all the milk and feed and everything. So if you can keep them alive for 6 months, the more you can maximize your profit after that, the better. So we're going to be selling them out with a calf at foot about 26 months old, and hopefully turning £1,000 into possibly £1,800, £2,000 with not much more expense. Only one more winter to hold them. So we've got roughly 70 cattle with various bits and pieces of age. As we change systems, we've still got some stores to go and things. So we've got 25 heifers that went to the bull now. So we're in sort of tight times at the moment till we start selling them out next year. And then hopefully we'll be in a system of selling 25 cows and calves every year, which hopefully will be a more profitable system, more risk, I suppose. And we're in a TB area as well. So there's lots of things to think about, but we're trying to bolster a business that's more sustainable. We've got 2 little kids coming through, so we need to look at how we make them have a future if they want it. And if they don't, then yeah, we've got a nice pot of money to retire on, hopefully.
Yeah. I want to spend a lot of today actually talking about poultry and also the River Wye, because actually by complete coincidence, because of course I put huge amounts of planning into it when I speak to people for these things. I'm actually speaking to Stephen Ware also about the River Wye next week. So it's quite nice to actually have a little bit of focus on this. But before we do that, let's turn to your sort of diversifications. Where should we start?
With the hens, if we can. Because we diversified. Well, we decided in 2015 our beef and sheep unit was not profitable in any means. Myself and Aston were still working out full-time jobs, so it was a hobby at the weekends. My dad passed away in 2015 as well, so we sort of inherited the ground at home fully. We were on a business farm tenancy with him prior to that, but I think we decided we were either going to have to sell up and buy a bungalow and have 3 lovely holidays every year and just take the fact that we earned very good money and do that, or we were going to have to do something quite drastic and invest and borrow some money and do something at home. So we decided to take that route, because living in a bungalow and 3 holidays a year sounded quite boring, really. A bit too easy. Yeah, sometimes I regret that, but never mind.
There are days.
So we had a meeting with our bank manager. We looked at the figures. We went through, they said, yeah, we'll support you. Poultry, egg production, no problem, we'll lend you as much money as you want, which is a really different conversation to the one we'd had 3 years earlier when we wanted to buy a bigger farm. And they sort of said, you're going to have to love it, because you're going to have to live on beans on toast for the next 30 years. So a really different conversation, which freaked me out a little bit, because really, you're going to just borrow £1 million and you're going to give us it and we'll pay it back in 15 years. It's like that in farming terms is sort of unheard of a little bit.
It doesn't happen.
So I was just like, okay, I feel a bit uneasy about this, but we did the figures. We were really confident. We are borrowing a massive amount of money, but I don't ever lie awake at night worrying about it, because we've made sensible decisions off the worst case scenarios. So we borrowed the money. It took us 2 years to get planning, which was a bit traumatic. It cost us we decided we could risk sort of 20,000 to try and get planning. And if we lost it, then we just have to suck it up and we'd be selling up anyway. But we were on a journey that once we started, we couldn't get out of with the planning. And we ended up costing us about 46,000 just to get planning, which was a huge amount of money to us on the scale we were. So that was quite scary. And during the planning process, we lost our contract because of ammonia emissions.
No.
Yeah, we were going to go fertilized egg, which meant that we could have had 2 sheds and no acreage needed because they have to be inside. And we lost that contract because of ammonia emissions, and they wouldn't go multi-tier for fertilized eggs. So we had to get a free range contract. So we've put 1 shed in. We run 14,500 birds in it. And yeah, that was just a traumatic journey, really. It taught us a lot. We're still confident in our decision making. We just put planning in then for the biggest shed we could after talking to people with the internal kit. We went multi-tier, which is less ammonia. So yeah, that was a hell of a learning journey, because you're going from, freaking out, paying £2,000 or £3,000 bill for feed to now paying an astronomical amount every month for feed. And yeah, the internal, it was like monopoly money. It was just unreal when we were doing that. And money you're paying out for building the shed and the internals, it just felt like monopoly. I mean, you become desensitized to the amount of money you pay out every month now once you go into that. But that's been a huge learning curve. But we were always concerned about the manures. So that's what sparked the journey to go down the sort of study route that I have done. But other things that have come along to diversify into, during lockdown, I was on furlough from the show because obviously no shows.
Of course.
I went back to help with the online stuff because I was head of business development, which meant I was in charge of all the sponsorship, comms and marketing, and all the outside events that are held outside of our shows. So total furlough, which was quite a traumatic and weird experience. From a mental sort of I like to be busy and have a very sort of lot to do. So during that time, as things started to open up again, a lot of our friends that have holiday lets already were sort of like, the pubs weren't reopening, little country pubs that really weren't financially viable to reopen, or the people had just decided, actually, we don't want to do this anymore, we're not going to reopen, weren't offering the services that were priorly available to guests staying in the area, because a lot of these guiles are Monday, Wednesday, Friday changeovers. So there was nothing midweek open really in the area, as we were in that sort of trepidation of things half and half. And Wales was a little bit different to England as well with their rules. So it was quite difficult for people to actually enjoy a full experience of being on holiday in the area. So somebody asked if I could go and cook for some people that wanted a meal. And I sort of said, yeah, I can go and do that. It'll be fine. There's only 2 of them. And that's kind of accidentally sparked off a business I'd never planned to start. So we'd set up a business and we deliver platters and pre-prepared food into holiday lets 3 days a week now. It started just on Instagram Messenger, didn't have a website, didn't have anything. It was just people messaging through Instagram, and the girls that have the holiday lets sharing the fact that this facility was available to their guests. And now we have a website, and I'm looking to employ another member of staff.
Brilliant.
And we are expanding into opening a farm shop on the 25th of July that we just decided a couple of weeks ago that we're going to do in one of our holiday cottages that we bought last year.
Wow, it's all go, isn't it?
So we're super busy. I mean, I am. It sounds mad because in my brain they're all in their own little boxes. And we kind of do that, we do that, we do that. But when you tell somebody about everything we do, it does make me sound a little bit ridiculous. It's like, really busy. So yeah, we started that. So we're expanding that into a shop. I've always wanted a farm shop though, so it's not something that I'm just starting from scratch. It's all been in my head for the last 20 years. Yeah. So and because of the jobs I've had, I have a huge contact book. And from working at the Royal Welsh, we did a lot with new food producers and small brands in Wales and things. So my contact book is a good book, and I can just say, right, we're going to do this, and then I know the right people to ring. So that's a really good benefit from having worked off farm, I suppose. You get those contacts and that network that you don't necessarily get when you're just sitting and staying on farm. So I think that's hugely important that people get off farm at some point.
Another really interesting thing you're doing at the moment, this is the Guardians of the Bees project, which is relatively new. And this is, broadly speaking, a sort of conservation diversification. What is it, and how does it work? What's the idea?
So Guardians of the Bees, I was looking at this the other day. I registered the domain name back in 2018.
Oh, really?
And it's taken this long to get it up and running because the day job when I was working for the show was just, massively stressful and so time consuming that you don't have time to do much. And then COVID hit and everything changed, and we've sort of come back around. And now, since working away from offices, just coming back home, you've just got to get on with things and sort of just say you're going to do it and put a time frame on it, because we had nothing at the beginning of the year except the domain name. I rang the accountant and said, right, I really want to get on with this. Should I book a stand at the smallholders down at the showground? It's the first show back of the season. I really want to get this business off the ground. She goes, yeah, go for it, you'll manage. So we basically in a month built a website, got a product, bought a printing machine. We had the honey already, so ordered some jars. I think when you break things down into really simplicity steps of how you do things, it is doable. You can do things in a really short period of time. But again, I think it's because I've got a contact book and I know where to get jars, I know where to get labels. Do you know what I mean? So it makes life a little bit easier. But the Guardians of the Bees, if I'm completely honest, was thought of because of our farm overdraft. We can never seem to get the overdraft to come down. We pay all the bills, we pay the bank back a huge amount of money every month, but the overdraft seems to just sit there static, and it annoys the hell out of me that we, as a business, I don't feel like we're moving forward because that overdraft is just hanging over us all the time.
Yeah, I've heard that so many times.
And I think it's bloody frustrating because we pay so much back to the blooming bank every month, and yet as a business I feel like we stand still and actually probably make a loss on the beef and sheep. So I was just like, we've got to have to change what we do here. And we're not in a particularly good area for good ground. Grass is about all we can grow. We're very heavy clay. So I was just like, what the hell are we going to do to fix this sort of solution for this problem? So I thought, well, we've got this little patch. We're in a very good sort of nature first area anyway, because we are in a rubbish ground. So we're not high production. We're not growing any crops or anything. So I thought, well, what can we do? What have we got? Like, well, we've got the beehives. Our beekeeper pays us in rent every year. and like we can't eat it all, we have a surplus. So I was just like, well, we could sell the honey for a start, we've got the bees, we could sell the honey, and it's our own honey. And then I thought, well, the initial idea was actually for you to be able to buy a 3 meter square identified by what 3 words app, and you could buy it for your friend and offset their carbon footprint for their hairdryer or their kettle, or whatever it was that they had. An excessive tea drinker could buy, a 3 meter square to offset their kettle, and it'd be quite a nice little gift for somebody, an easy gift, a different gift. And the more research I did into carbon and actually bringing it down to a domestic level that people in their homes understand, the general public, is a really difficult task. The technology's not there, the data's not there, the actual calculations of things isn't there yet. So it kind of amuses me that it is such a corporate thing at the moment, like, British Airways or Brewdog beer are buying up forestry to plant these trees to say they're offsetting their businesses, which on that kind of scale is sort of doable. But not down to a domestic level. I like to bring things down to a simple thing that everybody can understand, rather than just those that are sort of doing it and understanding it. And I think carbon footprinting and carbon emissions and what you do at home isn't anywhere near where it needs to be for people to understand what their impact is personally. So that's where we started with it. I wanted to bring it down so that it wasn't great big companies buying up, thousands of acres of forestry. I wanted to bring it down so an individual could feel like they were doing something that we could genuinely prove that we were doing for them under Guardians of the Bees, that a 3 meter square offsets X amount of energy usage, and therefore if you use this kettle 4 times a day, we can average out this is the energy usage, and you need to buy 4 squares, or whatever it was. That was the initial idea, and it's been proven to me that I can't do that yet, because the knowledge and the information and the data isn't out there yet. So we thought, right, well, we'll have to come back a step further, and we'll try and set it up so that that is the end game. So for now, we're doing habitat sponsorship. So you become a guardian, you pay us an annual sort of membership to become a guardian, to have this 3 meter square for us to maintain in pollinator and environmentally friendly way. And you can sponsor a piece of hedge, a piece of pond, an individual tree, and for every individual tree you do, we'll plant another one. And if there's any storm damage and that tree gets damaged, we'll plant another one as well, so that you've always got that sort of space, if you like, for a tree. So that's been a huge learning journey, really, from actually where we sit from a carbon point of view as well. And I think until the general public on an individual basis can understand carbon, we're not going to make a big enough change.
I think that even goes beyond the general public as well. I mean, in Groundswell this year was actually full of sessions on carbon capture, carbon accounting, and even the guys up on stage. No one really knows what's going on.
Nobody knows, and I think that's the frustrating thing about it, because I think farmers are going to fall into a trap, and I think it's already happening, that you're giving ground to plant trees to offset somebody else's carbon footprint, and you can sell the air equivalent, can't you, for carbon offsetting above your trees. But actually, one, that means that company isn't actually reducing the carbon. They're just saying, oh, we've bought so many trees acreage and that's offsetting it, so we don't need to change how we do what we're doing. Secondly, if you've already sold your carbon offset, you need to retain your own. You need to become carbon neutral yourself. So if your carbon footprint can't offset on your own trees and you've sold it to somebody else, you're kind of getting into a bit of a trouble then, because you're going to have to buy offset to offset what your business does, or really change what you do to reduce your carbon footprint. So I think people need to sort of don't chase things that aren't quite proven yet, I suppose, so that you can be carbon neutral yourself before you go selling anything off to anybody else. I think is one of the lessons I've learned on this sort of journey of research, really. Is not to get into that trap of being not carbon neutral yourself because you've sold the assets off to be able to allow somebody else to be carbon neutral. So that's quite an important thing just to note, really. But I don't know, we're only really in our infancy on the habitat, but everybody I talk to sort of says there is nobody else really doing that particular way of looking at it. And obviously we have the honey product as well. And because we've got the Little Welsh Kitchen, once we employ staff, we'll develop a whole range of honey-based products. My end game really with that one is to have a completely environmentally friendly product, so that we would have frozen slices of honey butter in your freezer that you take one slice out, pop it on your toast to melt. There's no knife to wash, there's no mess, there's no butter in your jar of honey. Kids can decide whether they like it or not every 5 minutes, and you get half a jar left sitting in the cupboard because the kids have gone off it this week. So that we are reducing food waste. We're thinking more cleverly about food production and storage. So that is sort of a product that I would really love to be able to get off the ground, is a frozen slice of a honey butter that would reduce a lot of emissions and work and hassle for parents out there trying to feed kids in the morning. So there's a lot of things people should consider more with how they use and produce food, that's a bit cleverer than things are at the moment, that I think would help develop things further. So that's sort of an end game product for that particular business.
Let's turn towards the River Wye. And like I said, we are focusing on this for a couple of episodes. We'll be talking with Stephen next week about it. But from your point of view, can you give listeners some context to the issues connected with the River Wye, and especially pollution issues?
Yeah, okay. So we're relatively new into poultry, but I always knew, because we're not a very big farm and we're steep, so we're not spreadable acres either, that manure was going to be a problem. And the usage of manure. So I decided, I applied for Farming Connect Management Exchange back in, I think it was 2018. So I did the trip in 2019. And I wanted to understand the product, because every product, even a waste product, has a value of some sort, as long as you look for the solution for the problem. So I did a study tour, and I went to see an AD plant in Northern Ireland. I went to see a fluid bed incinerator in Scotland on a farm, and I went to see a mega power plant in Mordrick, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours below Amsterdam. So I did a 3-day trip, because I don't have time to do these things usually, and my other half has to look after everything at home and the kids. So I did it in 3 days, which was a bit extreme, but I'm glad I did it in 3 days, because it was all the information all in one go.
Yep.
I recorded a lot of the conversations just so I could listen to it back and make sure I didn't miss any of the points. And I learned loads about how valuable actually the poultry manure and litters are, and the differences between broilers and free range. Different diets mean you get a different end product. Some are suitable for some solutions and some are not. So I learned a heck of a lot on that trip. But the biggest thing coming back really is there isn't one single silver bullet that's going to fix the problem. 2, it's going to take collaboration between a lot of farms to get stuff done. And 3, the differences in the product are really big in what the solutions are. So I think coming back then, I was super excited. I had all this new information, and I created a website called Circular Farming, and I was going to do a questionnaire to understand actually what the surplus amount of manure is, because a certain amount does get used on farm for manure purposes and crops. There's a lot in broilers that are already being burned on individual farms to create the heat, to heat the birds from a broiler point of view, which you don't need to do for free range. They don't need that extra heat. So I was just like, well, actually, how much spare is there? We can't, some of it is being used, and actually the stuff that is being used, especially the burning for the broiler units, is actually, that's green energy. That's kilowatts that can be allocated to a green energy story, which nobody seems to tell anybody. So we set up the questionnaire on the website to understand what people were doing, how much they produced, how much they used, and how much they sort of had to give away or get rid of or sell or whatever. So that was 2019. So obviously we hit COVID, and my plans of going to the Pig and Poultry Fair in 2020 were demised. So that sort of questionnaire has been put on hold now, because I think it's such a contentious subject that is not something that I'm just going to be able to ring somebody and ask them to tell me. I think there's so much scaremongering, and the lobbyists seem to have the loudest voice and the most public voice, and they are blatantly blaming agriculture and farmers, which are their food producers, which I think a lot of people don't connect. You're saying agriculture, you're saying farmers a lot, and they're all to blame for this river pollution, but they're producing your food, and that is inevitably the issue. So I will reignite when we can get to events, the questionnaire. But in the meantime, obviously 2020, the River Wye made it into the national press because it went green. And it was basically poultry manure was blamed for that, 100%. Now, I'm not saying there isn't an issue, that farming is not contributing to the issue. We are, and we have to understand the data more accurately to how we're doing that and alter what we do to make things better, because we are a massive part of the solution. So I've done a few talks now to groups like the Friends of the Upper Wye. My work with the Radnorshire Wildlife Trust got me invited onto a panel for the Wildlife Trust's Wild Live that they do on YouTube.
Yeah, which is still available for anyone to watch on YouTube.
Yes, it
Please
is.
do go and check that out.
And I've written a 2-page, I've been invited to write a 2-page article for the Radnorshire Wildlife Trust's newsletter. Because I think the more I've talked to the lobbyists against farming, is they are, and this is going to sound really rude, but it's not meant to be, the most educated, uneducated people I've come across. And I don't mean that in a really negative way. They're so well read, they know all the stats on farming and how it's destroying the planet and all this kind of thing, and all the sort of rhetoric that we're getting at the moment as an industry is so frustrating. They haven't taken the time to boil that down to actually what is happening on farm along the River Wye catchment. And the global stats don't necessarily fit with what we do here in the UK. They definitely don't fit with what we're doing here in Radnorshire. We're not growing, acres of avocados. We're not destroying I mean, if anything, we're the ones that are nature first already.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not taking the time to look at that. And they're also totally ignorant to how the supply chain works. Because the biggest question I get asked is, why is there so many hens in Powys? Why are there so many hen sheds? Why do we need all these hen sheds? Well, basically, because you lot want to eat and you want higher welfare. The egg industry has changed dramatically in genetics for birds and all that kind of thing. They're more efficient. You can get a bigger egg because the consumer only wants to buy a bigger egg. They won't buy a box of mixed-sized eggs because that's what a hen will produce.
Yep.
So therefore you need more protein in the diet to push those birds to the extreme of producing that larger egg. You want welfare, healthy hens. You don't want caged birds anymore. So instead of having, 90, 100,000 birds in a shed that doesn't take up much floor space, you wanted, as a consumer, to push the welfare for those birds to be better, which I totally agree on. But the outcome of that was the industry needed a bigger footprint. You needed bigger sheds. You needed so many acres per 1,000 hens. So you pushed us to put farming, in that position. So more people went into poultry in Powys because predominantly exactly what our business had to do. We're beef and sheep. It wasn't making any money. It was an easy diversification. There was a big push after foot and mouth that people wanted to change what they were doing from a beef and sheep because this area was affected by it and a lot of stock went. So it was a quicker turnaround to get it back on farm and things. And contracts were available. And my argument now to the lobbyists that are trying to stop planning and they don't want any more poultry here, we're actually in a really good economic, sensible, sustainable business model now. You have a good density of product and therefore you have a good density of waste, which actually now, if Powys County Council and Welsh Government got on board and actually had proper conversations with people, you've got an economically viable waste management system opportunity, because it's a really expensive product to transport anyway, transporting water around the country really, because it's not a dry product coming out of free range hens. So actually, if you stop planning here and you push it somewhere else, you're just creating another river to be in the same state.
Okay, so that aspect of dealing with waste would be part of your solution.
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, your density of it here now is actually great. I mean, what I saw over in Mordrick was a major power plant that was started purely because they wanted to develop into poultry. They weren't allowed because their pig and dairy industry is already high. They're phosphate loaded. So the government said no poultry manure can be spread on the land here. So they had to think of other solutions. So the Mordrick plant was a €150 million investment started by a farmer cooperative because the feed-in tariffs were there. they could create the electricity to go back into the grid and get paid for it. So they were on a 12-year tariff. They paid the 153 million back in 8 years, and they were just about to renew another government tariff for another 12 years. But they said if that tariff ever stopped, they just closed the doors. They wouldn't do it anymore because it wouldn't become financially viable. They'd actually have to charge a farmer between 60 and 80 pound a tonne to receive their manure, to process it into the electric. So it needs really high level government conversations to be happening in a proper manner to put infrastructure in place and actually produce green energy from this waste product that's being blamed for a major pollution issue in the River Wye.
Yeah. So tell me about the Catchment Alliance, because this in essence would be an action group that brings all these groups together.
Yes, this purely has been born out of frustration because I'm sick of seeing negative stories reaching the press by people that don't understand why it's happening. And my total fury at attending a farmers, I won't say which one, conference.
Yeah, please don't.
In a question was asked. I'll be very careful now. I'll try and be diplomatic. A question was asked in a certain commodities session about the River Wye and pollution, and somebody who should know better came back with an answer of, I have poultry, I also have a lot of land, we don't necessarily have a problem, which absolutely made my blood boil, because for the since 2019 and doing my study tour and understanding there is actually solutions, that we're not reinventing the wheel. This isn't technology that's 20 years away. This is happening now. This stuff is happening already. It's just about actually putting an action plan in place to put it in. So I was so infuriated by that answer that I kind of thought the industry and the supply chain are not taking any responsibility for this. They're hiding their heads because it is such a contentious issue. And I think the lobbyists have actually shot themselves in the foot a little bit, because they've created such a lot of noise and such a lot of negativity that actually now the industry is too frightened to say, actually, these are the facts, this is what's happening, we're part of the solution, these are the solutions, this is what we can do about it. And they've got themselves in a position now where, well, I'll give you a great example. When I went on the Wild Live, when I was introduced as the only farmer on the panel, I was brave to come and talk to them.
It was one of the key things I picked up from that. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
why am I brave? Why am I going to get, slaughtered because I'm a farmer and I have poultry, and I have to be brave to come and speak out against you guys, the lobbyists that are trying to save the river, to put our industry in the firing line, to say we're part of the solution. We are, as an industry, the largest land-owning industry in any kind of industry. We do own the biggest land, so of course we're contributing to it. But what they don't understand, and what that survey that the Lancaster University have done on river catchments and pollution and river quality, is phosphates are already in the soil. You don't need to be putting it on. We are overloading it, definitely. But there's stuff already in the soil that's going to create that pollution. There are better ways of doing what we do. And I do see examples. I think, God, you're just doing us no favour there, what you're doing on that farm by the river. You are creating an issue. And I think it just comes down to not lack of education, but a generational thing. We've always done that on that field, so therefore we carry on doing it. I think there is a change now within the industry that isn't the case anymore. There are new generations coming through that are making changes on how farms are farmed. But in some cases, I do see bad examples of farming, and I think, well, it is our own fault in some cases. But because the lobbyists have created such a negative attitude towards the industry and individuals, I was saddened by the fact I had to be brave to go on a panel to talk about river pollution as a farmer, as part of the food producing supply chain. That kind of incensed me even more, that the Catchment Alliance is a hugely important voice for agriculture and farming, and to sort of say to the lobbyists, look, we produce your food to a really high standard, really high welfare, and this is the situation that's been created, and in a really short space of time. So the industry has grown in the last sort of 50, 60 years. So that's why it's a new thing on the radar for the consumer. That's why there's new sheds going up. It's a new growth industry, and it keeps on growing. So I think, there's a lack of education out there, but the River Wye situation is being made worse by the loudest voices that aren't necessarily talking to who they need to talk to, and supply chain have to get involved. So the Catchment Alliance is supposed to be able to bring everyone together, led by a farmer, because I'm doing this off my own back, and because I do have such a good contact book. I already have contacts in Welsh Water.
Yep.
NRW are a bit sketchy to get hold of, but I'm connected enough that I know enough people that I can make this work.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just giving farmers the confidence that actually you don't need to be brave, you're doing your job, and we need to have sensible conversations about solutions that are already existing, that I have seen in action, that just need to be talked to at a proper level with Welsh Government, and talk about infrastructure and how we would make it work, and how we could power every house in Powys with poultry manure waste from Powys. Like, it could be the biggest green story that Wales could actually put out there, to be quite honest.
So from your point of view, what's the next step?
I suppose the next steps are I get Welsh Government to talk to me, because I can't find anybody that knows the same information that I know. I can't find anybody in Welsh Government that's actually decided they're going to go and see these things, these solutions, and actually look at waste as an asset, because it is a massive asset, both to in the agricultural industry as a fertilizer and to the green energy market. And the byproduct of that green energy market is actually fiberphos, which is we import the plant that I went to see in Mordrick. We import their byproduct. It all comes to the UK and France for crop production. And they said, actually, if you went in and you built the same plant we've got here, we'd lose your marketplace, because you'd have enough to use yourself. You wouldn't need to import any from us. So I think there just needs to be proper conversations, factual conversations, instead of finger pointing about how dire everything is and how the industry's doing all the damage. And I think the problem is, because nobody else has got that knowledge, they don't know where to start, and they don't know how to have those conversations, because they just think it's such a big issue, there's no solution, and they're just hiding their head in the sand a little bit, which is really disappointing. So I'm just trying to create a little bit of noise, so I open a few doors to get people to talk about it properly without being crucified for it.
Wow, we are going to start to round this up, but I'm sure we could probably talk about that for another hour, I reckon, at least
next year.
Yeah, we'll do focusing on that. But I'll be interested in your responses to these. We always finish the show with the same two questions. The first is, if you have a message for the public, what would it be?
Keep buying British. It's the best product in the world, and don't believe everything that you read in the press. Always try and find out UK statistics. The NFU are great at trying to put out UK statistics for food production, and don't believe everything in the press about how things are healthier for you and less environmentally damaging on certain diets and things like that. Just do your research. Don't believe everything you're told in the press.
And finally, a message for farmers.
Keep doing what you're doing. We do produce the best products in the world. Don't get disheartened. I suppose the biggest thing I've learned in the last 12 months from everything that I've gone through is things do come right. There's a roller coaster. Things are up and down all the time, and we're in a down at the moment. We're going to make a loss on the hens this year because of everything that's going on in the Ukraine and just the general marketplace for eggs. And we've got a lot of money borrowed, and interest rates are going up. You could dwell on so much of the negativity and let it get on top of you, but inevitably you're producing an essential product. We feed the nation, and that is a super, super important job. So you just got to ride the lows, find the highs, stay positive, and keep going, because I think we do the best job in the world.
Well, Sarah, I hope that you keep going with this much energy. But how do people follow you on social media?
Oh gosh, now each business has its own. Just basically follow Guardians of the Bees. That's the
Perfect.
one. That'll be the most interesting one to follow at the moment. So yeah, follow Guardians of the Bees.
Lovely. Thank you, Sarah. Thank
No
you
problem.
very much for listening. Please do subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform you're using, and share it on your socials. Next time, like I said earlier, we'll be talking about the River Wye a bit more with Stephen Ware, who is a poultry and horticulture farmer from Herefordshire. So I hope you can join me then. I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and I hope you have a great week.